Okay, we're moving slowly along. We're not getting anywhere, but it's quite interesting. At least you can read the book differently now. And it's a lesson in reading, that reading is not what we think it is. I've been reading Insight for 40 years, and I'm a beginner. I'm trying to make sense of it. And you have to find that as a human being, there are people in history that are culturally quite beyond you. Whether it's Balanchine's ballet, or Cézanne's painting, or Beethoven's symphonies. I think I got that disease of mystery, I suppose, or realism, from trying to play Chopin. When I was in my early teens, I got totally intoxicated with old Freddie Chopin and played maybe 3 hours a day in that. But I wasn't a 10th-rate Chopin pianist. And people have no difficulty acknowledging that in the arts. You have wonderful people playing in symphony orchestras. None of them will play solo. You have this sense that there are people way beyond us in musical reality. I like to recall von Karajan. One of his experiences was conducting the 9 symphonies for recording. Now, recording is a hell of a job. It was brought to a fine art by that crazy Canadian, what's his name? The mad pianist. Glenn Gould, yeah. He specialized in it. It consists in playing over and over, splicing bits, retesting, etc. So he had spent the summer like this. Von Karajan had the 9 symphonies ready for the 74 publication, I think. And then he was talking to a friend, and the friend said, what are you doing next week? And von Karajan said, I'm going to Strasbourg to conduct the 2nd and 3rd Beethoven symphonies. And his friend said, well, won't you be bored? And von Karajan said, for me there will be new symphonies. Huh? Hadn't heard them yet. It's a paradox of humanity that unless you listen long enough, you won't realize you haven't heard them. Yeah? Now, I brought that sense, and I was lucky in the university, I brought that sense of beyondness to mathematical science. And you struggle with the greats, the discoveries of the greats, or the edge, the frontier at the time. There were problems of the self-energy of the electron, and quantum electrodynamics was in a mess. And yeah, it's a hell of a struggle to glimpse the self-energy of the electron. And that's much easier than personal self-energy. And there is that cultural problem that relates to my pointing to the distant post-axial period, that spontaneously Lonerganism dissolves into a nominalism. I was talking to Richard, no, it wasn't Richard. Yeah, I was talking to you about the question of a debated topic in Lonerganism is the apprehension of values by feelings. Okay? Apprehension of values by feelings. And the debate has gone through the Method Journal for maybe 6 years. Oh, what's the problem? The problem is a simple-minded, a prioristic nominalism. What do you mean by feelings? Get out there and talk to your colleagues in physics, chemistry, botany, zoology. Either you understand feelings as an integrated aggregate of aggregates, physics, chemistry, botany, zoology, and a zone that is being struggled with in all these fields, or you're a simple-minded philosopher searching for a mythic solution. What do you mean by the apprehension? Again, you're talking about 4 layers of reality. Yeah? Lonergan, on page 733, line 8, I amuse people by quoting this book, but hell, any good composer can quote a symphony. Yeah? So 733 line 8 or so, or 6, 7, 8, Lonergan talks about us being breathless and a little late. Now, we're much more than breathless and a little late. There's a sense in which this Lonergan movement can end up as a remote sect of Catholic Christianity. And I see the signs. The big challenge is this economics. You cannot read this the same way as you read Insight and Method. This buggers up nominalism. Pardon my French. You can't bluff here. You've got to know something about the actual essentials of economics. But you can bluff your way through insight. It's a habitation, the habitat of a human animal who perhaps is slightly neurotic and needs a Linus blanket desperately. And there's a convenient bandwagon called Lonerganism, and I can get on the back and be famous. And that is a distinct possibility at the end of this millennium. When I read Lonergan first in 57, 58, my sense was, this won't take. I couldn't make any sense of, say, chapter 5. Now, the year before, I had spent almost the entire year studying space and time. The most recent efforts to handle the geometry of space and time, and quantum electrodynamics and all that. And this chapter is quite impossible. And I don't see any real effort to push forward from it. I was at a conference on hermeneutics during which I made this diagram. A volume came out on Lonergan's hermeneutics. There was no reference whatsoever to the canons of hermeneutics in chapter 17. Is this oversight or dishonesty? This relates to the economics because I think this volume is a challenge. Like when Lonergan wrote to me in 68, we can't go on talking about the family wage. Either you face the grim climb to a theory of distribution, or you shut up. And there's nothing wrong with shutting up. Some of us have a contemplative vocation, go monastic. But do you see my problem with what I would call Lonerganism, or a Lonerganistic perspective? Either you have a perspective or you haven't. But you haven't got Lonergan's perspective if you haven't a perspective. So I appeal to you to kill off the adjective or whichever part of speech you use, a Lonerganistic, Lonerganism, whatever. As Lonergan would say, well, you read my little book and then you're on your own. And it is a little book. It's a set of exercises that I sometimes describe, and perhaps I should describe it because it's appropriate in this context, as a dense graduate book written in the absence of the undergraduate texts. Now, what do I mean by that? In 57, when I got the book Insight, I had another book at hand called Theoretical Physics by a man called Joos, Joos. And it was a powerful, the same length, 750-page summation of everything I had struggled with for the 3 undergraduate years. There were 28 pages on particle dynamics. Now, I had studied that over 2 semesters. So I could read the 28 pages. And later I lectured on the same field, so I could read the 28 pages better. There are 28 pages in Insight on the canons of hermeneutics and hermeneutics. There is no sign of the undergraduate texts. Does that make sense? So you have a book, Dewey's Theoretical Physics. You look back from that book. First of all, immediately there are all these undergraduate courses that enable you to read his short presentations of hydrodynamics, which the text I used has 900 pages by a man called Lamb. It's just a delight about the movement of water. This text has about 20 pages. There are maybe 20 pages in space-time and so on. Now, Dewey's is readable by the community in physics because the 19th century brought forth Maxwell and Boltzmann and Lorentz and so on. Yeah? So you have that accumulation of insights that makes the book possible. Lonergan, quite on his own, in that weird tradition of post-Kantian philosophy, tackled Aquinas and Aristotle, and then modern knowledge, mathematics, physics, chemistry, etc., and worked towards his personal heuristic. I recall, I mentioned earlier today the animal as a flexible circle of ranges of schemes of recurrence. And when I was struggling with this book in the mid-60s, I remember being in Toronto, and this famous Lonergan scholar turned up, and I was naive and innocent and delighted to meet this learned person, and whose name I will call him Adolf, because he's still alive. And so I said, "Oh, Adolf, I'm so glad to meet you because I've got problems with some of this book." I said, "For instance, what does Lonergan mean by the flexible circle of ranges of schemes of recurrence in which the animal lives?" And Adolf looked at me as if I had horns. He wasn't reading the book that way. Yeah? In other words, he wasn't reading the book. Either you have thought out the behavior of the rabbit or the rat or whatever in terms of, okay, what are the circles? What are the schemes? Yeah? Or you're bluffing. It's a linguistic world. Yeah? There's that wonderful page about the study of the organism at maybe 484, begins with the thing for us. And then you move to anatomy, physiology. By the time you get to the bottom of the page, you're into the metaphysics of the animal. But you're not. It's an impossible page. So we're faced here with the problem of reading a classic. It's like Ashkenazi talking about Beethoven. It's beyond me. Von Karajan conducting Brahms. The last event I think I remember of Von Karajan's life was him coming to London to conduct a Brahms symphony in the Albert Hall, if you know that extraordinary spot. And he was late because the flight was late. And then he comes out on the stage in a walker. This guy is obviously out of it. And then he gets at the podium and he rests the walker. He doesn't look at anything. Yeah? Don't need a text for this. And yeah, you're off for an hour. Huh? In the field of linguistic meaning, it seems we have arrived at some idiot democracy. We are tutored by our professors to be what Leo Strauss calls lion tamers. And it's a wonderful image. I used it at the end of my book, Lonergan's Challenge to the University and the Economy. The notion is that you have, say, a professor of German history, and he has 3 barrels lined up in the classroom. He's going to lecture on the culture of early 19th century Germany. So he brings into the room, he has the chair and the whip. He brings into the room these 3 lions, say Goethe and Schiller and Beethoven, and he gets them up on the barrels. Yeah? Yeah. They have been tamed by this professor. And he trains the students to have the same attitude. Yeah? It's a totally different attitude from Von Karajan. Yeah? Who's to invite somebody to read Schiller? Yeah? The function of education is to point up. Yeah? Most professors are third-rate. In economics, the great people are freaks. Cantonon, a crazy Irish banker. Quinet was a doctor who got into economics in his early 60s and got out of it after a while, but he was terrific. And so on. Marx, you know about. Kalecki was a second-year university student that dropped out. Yeah? Keynes was a gambler, married well, a ballerina. Diplomatically married. Was he gay? The function of an academy is for the second rate to point to the first rate. Yeah? And that doesn't happen. Yeah? Some of us have talked about, writing essays for these second-rate minds. Don't strain yourself trying to be authentic. You've got to get the Union card. But my serious point is on the economics and on Lonergan that ask yourself, do you know what you're talking about? What do I mean by a feeling? What do I mean by a dream? I have a dream. What do I mean by a dream? If you are not meaning by the word dream a heuristic, the integral heuristic of the physics and chemistry and botany and zoology, then you're bluffing. And there's got to be another line of work. Yeah? And the function of metaphysics, which we haven't developed yet out of Lonergan, it's there in chapter 16, which nobody reads. Nobody reads chapter 15 either. Hell, nobody reads chapter 5. Well, nobody really reads chapter so on. Now, I don't know whether you find that disconcerting or, generating further gloom. But the problem is that we should move bone-wise towards a glee in mystery. Yeah? And that's not part of our psyche. Yeah? I have a diagram here, which is the topic of our closing session. The diagram is complex. The response of a lot of people is, oh Christ, not another McShane diagram. Huh? The problem of diagramming is that it's something emerging in history which helps to objectify the complex reality that we are. Had I had enough backing space, I would have brought the score for Mozart's 21st Piano Concerto, which you all probably know of. I think it's the second movement that was used in the film Elvira Madigan. Do you know the melody at all? Yes? And then there's a brilliant innovation by Mozart in the next bar, where he plays a high A, and he goes down about 4 octaves to carry forward the music. But my point is that that piano concerto has a diagram which invites reverence. It invites you to be human, because Mozart's a hell of a lot larger than us. One wonderful music critic said that in the history of music, Mozart stands out as the first, but Beethoven is the greatest. That wonderful American wit, what's his name, in the last century. Anyway, his quip about Wagner. You remember? Wagner's music is better than it sounds. You didn't get that this time either. Mark Twain. Mark Twain, yes, Mark Twain on Wagner. Do you see the problem here that we're up against somebody with a perspective that is way beyond anything in this century? And we don't have it down pat. And none of us have it down pat. And maybe what you need to do is go off and take just the front quotation from Aristotle and make that your life's vocation. Presenting images. Yeah? That problem of the calculus. To settle down and see, how do I present the images so that this will really vibe in the bones of the class? And it can be done. And the same with chemistry and literary studies. I don't know if it's as bad here as it was for me in Nova Scotia. I was talking about professors teaching Shakespeare, killing off the bard. And literature courses where you read a novel a week, you know. I have witnessed students struggling to write an essay on Joyce's Ulysses this week. Next week it's Dante. But the point is to weigh up from this session your attitude towards this strange first-class minder, and to find out that perhaps you really haven't got the stuff down pat, and it doesn't matter.